once again, just want to say thank you for attending today's EnRoute webinar. Today, Jesse is going to be talking about all the nesting features in EnRoute. So he'll be showing you all the different ways that you can maximize your surface area there and make the best use of your software. And after the presentation, we'll go ahead and open it up for a Q&A session. So if you do have any questions, either about nesting or just about EnRoute in general, just go ahead and type those in the chat window in the bottom there, and we'll go ahead and answer those after the presentation. So if you do have any, you can go ahead and type them in during the presentation so you don't forget. And Rebecca, looks like you're having issues with no sound, no picture. Does anyone else experiencing the same problem? Well, I guess you wouldn't be able to hear me. Well, I'm smart. Okay, well, I'll see what I can do to help out Rebecca. And with that, we'll let Jesse start the webinar. And one more thing, we will be recording today's webinar. So if you have to step out for a minute to help a customer or something, or you want to send it to one of your employees or something, we will be recording it, and we'll send you all a link to the recording as well. And with that, we'll turn it over to Jesse.
All right, thank you, Stuart. Like Stuart said, thank you for taking the time out to learn a little bit more about EnRoute. We are going to go over quite a bit of the nesting features. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with the automated process. So our true shape nesting, and then we're going to work a little bit with block nesting, and then dynamic nesting as well. We will also cover the nesting report while we're at it as well. As you can see on screen, there are some parts that I have already toolpath. Generally, we recommend that you toolpath your parts before going into nesting. That way, EnRoute can actually put it from toolpath to toolpath rather than from geometry to geometry. Because if it is not toolpath first, you have to overcompensate the gap for the toolpath. If the toolpath is already on it, EnRoute knows that it's there, and it will space it out accordingly. So there are a few different things that we have inside here. So for instance, we have some bigger numbers, we have some smaller letters. And what I've done is I've grouped these three top words, and then these are all individual down here. And this is just to show when you go into the nesting, by habit, I generally take mine to the outside of my plate. You do not have to do this for two of the three nesting features. For instance, if you're using standard or legacy, then you do not have to take them outside. However, if you are using new, it is recommended that you bring them outside because it will be recognized as an obstruction or a place to stay away from, which we're going to cover in this webinar as well. So by habit, I bring mine on the outside of the plate. And once again, just kind of a creature of habit, that's what I like to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select everything before I go into my nesting, and I'm going to go over here on the left-hand side and click this little gray envelope. Now what we're going to see on screen is we're going to see this big pink box up here, and that is, once again, because these parts are grouped, EnRoute knows I cannot break these apart. However, down here, it sees these as different entities, and I can nest different quantities of these. For instance, if I need 3 of these little O's, what I would have to do is I would actually have to come back out, ungroup it, and then come back into nesting, because EnRoute will not break these apart due to the grouping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back out and I'm going to ungroup this so we can get individual letters. Now when I come in here, you're going to notice that all of them have turned pink, and that just means that now I can nest all of these parts. Now, very rarely am I going to have a quantity of 1 for each one of these parts, especially if I'm doing channel letters or big signage or individual parts. So inside here, I can actually click on individual ones. I can hold Shift to select more than one. I can also do the bounding box. And just like outside of the nesting, it is a fully enclosed lasso. So if you do the bounding box, it has to be fully contained. So now inside here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in some random numbers. So inside my quantity, I'm going to tell it that I actually need 7 of these. Whenever you put in a parameter down here at the bottom, it's a very good habit to turn or to hit your tab button, so that way it stores it and recognizes it, moves on to the next section. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to do 7 of those. Let's go ahead and let's do 3 of these. And let's go ahead and let's do 8 of these. Okay, so quantity is exactly as it sounds. How many do I want of each part? Like I said, I could do the whole part if I want to, or I can do individual pieces. However, the next thing is something that's pretty neat that EnRoute has, and that is the priority order. So with this one, for instance, if a part gets dropped, scratched, or broken, and you need another part quickly off the machine, if you just do a general nest, it may throw it towards the back end of the part or the back end of the sheet, and I may not want to wait that long in order for it to get off the machine. So what I can do is I can say, okay, well, one of these actually broke. Go ahead and give me 2 of these, but give it a priority order of number 1. So try and nest these first, and then throw everything else in the sheet. So that way I can pause the machine, take it off, and then finish cutting the sheet. So that way I can still utilize the nesting portion, but I can get the parts off the machine quickly so I can get them over to fabrication. My gap is going to be in between my parts. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say that I want an 1/8 inch in between my parts. My margin is from the edge of the sheet. So depending on what type of material I'm cutting, if I cut, for instance, plywood, generally I want to step in a little bit because it tends to push the part if you go outside the sheet and move back in. If you're doing a lot of ACM cutting or grooving, sometimes you want to give it a bigger gap so that way it doesn't actually stress relieve it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a 1/4 inch on the edge of my sheet. So that's a 1/4 inch in X and a 1/4 inch in Y. It will leave around the edge of the part. For instance, if I don't have a vacuum table, if I have clamps, I may have to put it in even farther depending on how many clamps I have in there, or if I screw down my part. So you can actually utilize this margin here to keep a clearance around the edge of your part. For this one, I'm not going to nest my originals. I'm going to leave them right where they are because we're going to use these for a couple different examples. You have your multiple sheets in here. I'm going to uncheck this because I want to try and put it all on one sheet if I can for this example. We're going to cover a remnant in the summary on the next example. Your step angle here, this is how much you're going to allow EnRoute to rotate your part. So as you see, we have quite a few different options. The lower you go, the more possibilities it has for fitting parts into each other. However, it is going to take a little bit longer the lower that number goes. If you are grain matching your material, you do have to either put 0 or 180, so that way it can match. Okay, however, on this one, I'm going to go and I'm going to put 90. Earlier, like I said, I have a habit of moving my parts outside of my sheet. That is because generally I do not use the standard, I use the new one. Okay, so with standard and legacy, those are 2 different versions that have very similar algorithms, but they nest parts in different ways. So the new nester, the reason that I pick this is there's one extra option that I have, which is obstruction, which we're going to cover. And that is, for instance, if I have a blemish or a knot in a wood or something that I don't want to nest my parts into, I can actually nest around that area and utilize the majority of that sheet, but not have to get that blemish in there as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click new. And the other option that I have is over here. This is our nesting node. So this is going to be where we want to anchor our nest. With new, I can select more than one option. On standard and legacy, I can only do one. So sometimes if you do standard and you click the bottom left, what you'll get is the L shape. So you'll actually get it to where it nests in the front of this sheet and then along the long side as well, which if you're cutting the scrap material off, it's not as easy. Whereas if I click new, I can say, go ahead and smash this to the front. So that way I can just make one clean cut and be done with it. Okay. Down here, you also have use holes. This just means if there is a part that is small enough to fit inside of one of these dropped areas. So for instance, like the inside of the 9, the inside of the 0, or inside this here, go ahead and put that in there. Once again, just more part utilization. For this one, I'm going to go ahead and say no. I'm going to go ahead and say, go ahead and apply that. It's going to go ahead and it's going to process, and then it's going to go ahead and it's going to put it on screen. Okay, so here's all my parts. I got them all in one sheet. And as you can see, on the left-hand side, I have these two, which I had a priority of number 1. So I can cut these out, I can pause the machine, and then continue cutting these and proceed on with my job. So not only do you get to dictate what you want to nest, but also how it nests as well. So it adds another benefit to EnRoute with the nesting on if I have an extra part I need to throw in there or anything like that. And there's a lot of different things that we can do, not only with nesting objects in priority, but the quantity as well. So selecting 1 or 2 that are different, or a whole section if we need to. Okay. For this one, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create multiple sheets, which is a very common practice. So if I have a lot of parts, I know it's going to create multiple sheets. We're going to go ahead and we're going to do that. So if we go in back into our envelope, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say I need a quantity of, say, for webinar, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say that I need 10 of these. Okay, and I'm going to need for these here, okay, I need 12. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick the stars. And I'm going to pick 7 of those. Okay, I'm going to create multiple sheets. And once again, I'm going to leave my originals alone because I want them to stay there. Okay, but I do want to create a summary on this one because I want to see what parts are on what sheet and how well it nested it. Okay, I'm going to say go ahead and apply this. We're using the same step angle and I'm still using the new nester. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wait for the progress bar in the bottom right hand corner to go all the way over to the right. So it is creating multiple sheets and it is doing quite a bit of math, so it may take just a few minutes in order to process. As you can see, it's kind of moving along on its own pace. Okay. Now, this is one of the biggest things that we get as far as nesting multiple sheets. If you were to export this or output this to your machine right now, you would get a whole bunch of random parts that really wouldn't cut anything, and then you get some on the end. What happens is EnRoute turns all the layers on as if they were transparent, so you can see all the way through them. What you would want to do is, before you output this, you'd want to come up to your layer button and toggle it on and off. Now I can toggle it by layer. So now I would output this sheet, and then I would output this one in order to get the correct amount of parts. Okay. Now we also created a summary for this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to check the summary. Anytime you see this little red triangle, it just means there's a flyout or a submenu. So where you're going to click and hold, and we're going to pick option number 3. This is going to be the nesting report. It's an XML. And we're going to come down here and it's going to give me overall. So it's going to say 2 sheets were nested. Algorithm 2, which is the new nester. These are my parts. These are the quantity. And then it breaks it down by layer. And this is actually your layer name inside of EnRoute as well. So it's going to show you all these parts. It's going to say these are the number nested. It's going to show you the parts and the quantity again. Now here's nested 1, which is our layer name. Here's sheet number 2, and here's the parts and the quantity as well. And one thing to note about this is the nesting summary is a one and done type scenario. So if you do want to save this, all you'd have to do is go up to the sprocket and do your save as, or print this out. So I would print it as a PDF if I wanted to save this, because next time I go into Nest and I click that create summary, it erases the old one and places the new one there. So just one thing to note, if you are going to use the create summary, make sure you remember that it is a one and done type scenario. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to leave this first sheet alone So as you can see, it's layer 1 and nested 1, because that's what our layer names were in our summary. But let's go ahead and I'm going to pick nested 1, so that's my current layer, but now I'm going to toggle them all on because I want to copy this here. Okay. Anytime I copy and paste onto a different layer, just remember that you want to pick paste to active layer, so that way it puts it on screen where it was from the other sheet. If you just click paste, it will paste it back to its original layer. Okay, but let's go ahead and let's say, okay, well, I've done this job, but I actually need to throw a few more pieces on. Maybe something got messed up, or I got another order. I need to add some more parts in the back end to fill in this sheet. Well, what we can do is not only can we use obstruction to stay out of areas that have blemishes, but we can also use it to our benefit as far as production goes. So now I can select everything, and anything that is inside of our plate is going to highlight as red, and that's the obstruction. That's why I tend to move my parts outside of the plate. Now I can say, okay, well, I do want to use the obstruct, but I only need these here. So some of these didn't come through, or they were the wrong size. Let's say that I need 6 of these. Okay, same spacing, same margin. I do not want to create multiple sheets. I don't have to create a summary for this. I just want to throw it in the back side here. Okay, same rotation angle. I click apply. Okay, so here's my parts. Inside here, I had more than that selected. Apologize about that. But what that's going to do is it's going to add it to the back end of the sheet. This just means that since I didn't have multiple sheets checked on, these are the parts that were left over that EnRoute could not nest. So I can just get rid of these, or I can move them onto another sheet. Okay. However, just like adding that part, let's say that we're cutting a piece of MDF or acrylic. You know, generally the bottom sheet or the top sheet is the worst because they have the kind of the strap marks. So let's say that I have a strap mark here and here, and this corner is chipped or broken. Okay, so now if I come in here, it does not have to have a toolpath on it. It just has to be touching or inside the plate. So let's go ahead and let's make one more. Let's say that it's right here. Okay. So now if we go into nesting, these are still highlighted as red. I'm going to go ahead and just leave these all as a quantity of 1. I'm not going to nest my originals. But I am going to try and hover it to the bottom of the sheet rather than the left, so that way it nests around these objects. Go ahead and apply that. And now you can see that EnRoute has nested those parts around the obstructed areas, so that way I can still try and get the best utilization out of that sheet. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this fits in here, so that way we can do our use holes scenario, which it does. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to nest just this here and this word EnRoute. Okay, so inside here, if I click use holes, I'm going to go ahead and say that I need, let's say I need 5 of these, but these I only need 2 of. Okay, my gap, I'm going to leave it at 1/8 of an inch. Margin, still 1/4. I'm going to change it back to the left-hand side. And I'm going to go ahead and click apply. Okay, so what it did is it put that N or the U inside of here, so that way I could still use that hole, and then it filled in the backside with those stars there. Okay. Now, one of the most common practices with items like this is if I need to add just one or two, for instance, I need to add this letter O in here, but I don't really want to go all the way back through that nesting process. There's kind of an in-between. Now, I could always just click and drag this in, which is manual nesting, but the problem is that I could actually do something like this, where if I'm far away, it doesn't look too bad. But what happens is it actually overlaps different parts. So what I'd rather do is I'm going to click and hold on the nesting option, and I'm going to click the dynamic nest. Now with dynamic nest, you do actually move the original. So if you do want to keep the original there, you want to make a copy first, you can hold Control and click from the middle to make a quick copy, or you could just move the original. So inside here, you have the same part offset and margin offset that you had inside your nesting option. And then you also have your rotation steps, which just means if I click this object and I'm going to move it into my plate, if I use my scroll wheel mouse, I can actually rotate this and place this on screen. So I'm going to say that I want it right there. Okay, so it will get it close to that part, but it will never overlap those parts. So that's a big benefit that the dynamic nest has over manual nesting, is it knows that part association and it won't overlap those. Whereas if I just clicked and dragged, you have that possibility. Okay. Now let's go ahead and let's talk a little bit about a remnant. So if I'm cutting out either hard to get material or expensive material, I may want to use what we call a remnant, or an oddball shape that's left over. If I'm just cutting out a rectangle or doing a material cutoff afterwards, probably not going to utilize this. However, like I said, if it's hard to get or expensive material, I may be able to squeeze one or two more parts in there, and if I can get more parts out of per sheet of material, it's going to be a little bit better cost savings. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to walk you through how to do this. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to highlight what I want. So I'm just going to do this bottom row. And when we nest, I'm going to say that I do want to create a remnant for this. Okay, one for each is just fine. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say, go ahead and apply that. And since we have that remnant button checked, what happens is this is going to be the material that is left over after those parts are cut. Okay, so what I can do is I can actually take this and I'm going to copy it and just make a new layer or a new file. So for this one, I'm just going to create a new file. I'm going to go ahead and paste it on there. And generally what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to rotate this 180 so I can get that nice clean corner back in here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use precision input and I'm going to rotate this 180. Okay, now what I'm going to do, I could move it in here as 0, 0, but I can also hit Control and 1 on my number pad if I have one on the right hand side. And now I know that's at 0, 0, my part's aligned. Okay, however, I still have that rectangle shape for my plate. Well, if I nest my parts, it's going to assume that it's the rectangle and it could actually nest parts out here. So what we would have to do is we would select our shape, and then inside here, this is going to say create plate from selected contour. We could also go from machining and plate from contour. What that does is that automatically creates the plate as that oddball shape, and now we can nest parts back into here if we choose to. So that's how we would utilize a remnant, and that's how we would create it and then use it again. Okay, you do want to be careful because once you create it as a shape, you cannot go back. So I'm pressing Control Z and nothing is happening. Good news is I did paste it into this layer, so I can just paste it back in if I need that shape. Okay, but something to note that you cannot go back to the square or the rectangle plate without having to go back and re-enter those parameters. Okay. So inside here, there is a lot that you can do as far as the true shape nesting and the dynamic nesting. The last option that we have for nesting is called block nesting. This is the older method with rectangles and squares. If you are cutting out parts and you want to do a common line, the parts do have to be either square or rectangle. They can't have a little notch, for instance, like the underside of a cabinet that has that kick plate. EnRoute will not create the common line for that. It will assume that it is that bounding box, either a rectangle or a square, if you're going to use that common line. Okay, however, if I do have them, it does work out pretty nice. So let's go ahead and let's put in some rectangles and squares. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a couple different shapes. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to toolpath them, the routing offset, and I'm just going to use an 1/8 inch end mill, so that way we have a pretty tight part. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select these, and I'm going to hit my nest button. I'm going to come down to block nester, and then once again we have the same thing. So we have our gap, our margin. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put my gap at 0, my margin at 0.25. And for this one, I'm not going to create the common line. I'm going to go ahead and click apply. So here's my part. It's going to share that line here with a 0 gap, and it nests it in there. Okay. If I do want to create the common line, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, create my common line, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to use this line in order to create our toolpath. So this is actually our toolpath part. So this part here we can get rid of. This is our common line. So now all we would do is I could either do an engrave, or I could click on and hold on the routing offset, and I'm going to click the open offset contour right in the middle, which is going to do the same thing as engrave. I'm going to go ahead and pick my, I'm sorry, that was an 1/8 inch. Okay, let's go ahead and say 0.25. Then we come in and we put in our feeds and speeds and our passes. Okay, and then that would create our common line cut. Once again, it does have to be rectangles or squares in order to achieve that. It will not account for true shapes, any kind of contour like this. Okay. So if we click and hold on that red triangle, just remember you have your nesting here, which you can either do true shape or block nesting. You have dynamic nesting, which is dragging from the top and moving in. You can scroll your scroll wheel mouse in order to rotate that. And then you also have your nesting summary over here, which would create a printout of your different parts and your sheets as well. Okay. Okay, Stuart, I think I am ready for some questions.
Queued up for you. We're going to start with Skip had a question. So when outputting a toolpath, is there a way to write directly in HPGL or PLT format instead of producing the output in G code and translating it? The reason is the output is very short, but the translation takes much longer.
What type of machine do they have? That's a question that we can answer. It's going to depend on the machine itself.
Okay.
But we can take a look at that in the drivers and see what kind of communication, what kind of output we can do for it.
So here he said that he has a multicam 3000.
Okay, with multicam, generally we drive through the either their Choreo or their Suite 4. Generally, we don't drive it directly. You can set that up through the communication drivers, but generally that's not something that we recommend or we go through and set up. Because generally we go through their software.
Their end. Okay. Charles had similar. He said same question, kind of. I would like control of the output. I have to copy and paste into the output to make it work with our machine. I also add additional information. It would be nice to have it output every time as a template we need to fill out.
So as far as like a traveler, so more information. So for instance, like the tool, the material, and all that as well. I'm talking more like a label.
Okay. Yeah. Let us know, Charles. We can get some more info. We'll get that question answered for you.
Yeah, if you're looking more information as far as like a template and a label with a printout, we can go through our ATP or automated process, and there are labeling functions that we have that you can label your parts and that. However, there is not a template where you would have to autofill in information. It's just the summary and then the file itself.
Okay, thank you. So we have a question from James. Said, when I hit apply after setting the nesting up, why does it only want to nest the holes in my letters and not drag the letters as a whole?
So for instance, if I'm nesting this, just the inside of this 6, so generally what that has to do is, generally that's a grouping thing. So if I were to toolpath this individually, so if I were to come here and say this is a routing offset external, this is internal. Okay, if I were to nest this, generally it will break that apart because it's not grouped together. It doesn't know that it's associated to each other. So see here how it broke it apart. What I'd want to do is I'd want to come in here and I would want to select it and group it first. If I'm putting 2 different toolpaths, if I put one toolpath on together, it will automatically group it. But if I do, for instance, like an engrave inside here, like if I'm engraving a name and then have a outside cut, I'd want to group that first and then go into nesting. So now when I nest, it knows that it's associated all in one.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we've got one more question. Here, Danny said, I've noticed while nesting that EnRoute always nests the large parts first. Is there a way besides using priority to get the smaller parts to the front of the sheet?
I would probably use priority. Are there a lot of small parts and just a few big parts, or is it kind of in between or mixed up? So there's a couple different things, but priority order is going to be the best solution for that.
So he said in general.
Okay, in general, I would probably put it in priority as far as that one goes first. And it doesn't have to be 1, 2, 3. I can put all the small parts as priority number 1 or number 2, and then leave all the bigger parts as 5, and it will know to do the smaller parts first.
Okay. Awesome. And Lena said, can I utilize tabs for smaller part?
Yes, you can. So you can use tabs. So that's just in your toolpathing. So inside this, if I want to add a tab, it's just down here. We call them bridges instead of tabs, but then you have a couple different versions of them, and then you have a length, height, and number. So inside here, just remember that everything's based off the bottom of the toolpath. So right now I have 0.26, which would be for 1/4 inch material. So I actually need to make the height of this tab 0.01 bigger than I would normally, because I'm going a little bit deeper than the actual material itself. And that's actually something that we're going to cover in one of our future webinars, is tabs and onion scanning.
Okay. And then we've got some more follow-up information from Charles about controlling the output.
Okay.
Said, yes, I have to label everything, and the tool changes don't work. So I have to replace, I would like it to output at the top something like date, company, etc. Just wants
Okay.
to be able to control what the output is.
Okay. Yeah. So that would be through the automated toolpath. And there's a labeling option. You can either do a sheet of labels that you can buy at Office Depot, or you can do a roll printer like a Zebra printer that continually prints out labels, and then you would just put them on your part. And those can be fully customizable. You can put images, company name, part name, printouts of the sheet, printouts of the part itself. There's a lot of information that you can do with our labels. So that would be a good solution for that.
Okay. And Paul said, what does priority mean in the nesting dialog?
Priority is in which order EnRoute nests those objects. So with a priority of number 1, EnRoute says, okay, I have to nest this first and then fill in with everything else behind it. It's not 1 to 5, it's 1 to infinity. It just starts at 5. But the lower that number, the more towards the front that part is going to become.
Okay. And let's see, we've got another one here. Skip said, when doing a hatch cut for a push-through shelf, is there any kind of warning other than visual to indicate when a pierce point is going to impact 2 parts and dig into one? Or I guess it would be called an island fill in EnRoute.
So the interaction in between them, is he talking about the... There's a couple different ways that could come up. If it's leaving the full material, then there's a couple different things. There's not a warning. It is visual. You'd have to look at this on screen. But that's something that I could take a look at and show you different ways around it.
Okay, so you'd be able to help with that.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, and the last question we have currently, just Charles following up on the question we had a little bit ago about the output. He said, is this inside the G code output?
The label? There's a couple different things. So with the label, it's different. It's a completely different file that you would run. You would either send it to your desktop printer or your roll printer, and then you would also have the code file. The code file wouldn't have any kind of labeling situation in it. It would be a completely different file.
Okay, he said, I do not need to label the part itself. I want to put the extra information inside the code output.
Okay, I can look into that. I don't believe we do that right now.
Okay, so something we can look into for the future. Thank you, Charles.
Yep.
Okay, well, I think that's all the questions we currently have. If anyone was just holding on to their question, waiting for an opportunity, go ahead and type that in now. Otherwise, I think we'll close it up for today. Okay, lots of people saying thank you, Jesse. We do appreciate you folks coming. If you do have any requests for future topics, things that would be helpful or more of interest to you, please let us know. Send us type a comment in the chat window or send us an email. We always want to make these useful as we can for you. And another big thank you to Jesse for taking care of this, presenting and answering all the questions. And we will see you folks next time.